Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My dear students, welcome back to my new lecture. In this lecture, I will talk about thyroid gland. I will discuss briefly its location, external structure, internal structure, and its hormones. So, thyroid gland, it is located below the larynx or inferior to the larynx. This is the larynx, and below the larynx is trachea. Let's suppose this is the larynx and this is the trachea. So it is present below the larynx, or you may say it is inferior to the larynx. So if you see the larynx from the lateral side, so the larynx somewhat look like this. This is the larynx and this is the trachea. Larynx consists of 6 different types of cartilages, such as thyroid cartilage, cricoid cartilage, retinoid cartilage, cuneiform cartilage, carniculate cartilage, and epiglottic cartilage. All these cartilages fused with each other with the help of certain ligaments and muscles, and they form a box-shaped structure, which is called larynx, and it may also called sound a voice box, because here voice is produced because of the presence of vocal cords in the larynx. So the thyroid gland, it is present below the larynx, or you may say it is inferior to the larynx. So here is, let's suppose, the thyroid gland, and it is inferior to the larynx, and this is the trachea, and here is the posterior end of the trachea, and this is the interior end of the trachea. So it is interior to the trachea while inferior to the larynx. So location is inferior to the larynx and interior to the trachea. Let me draw the frontal view of the larynx and let me show its external structure. Let's suppose this is the larynx and here is the trachea. The thyroid gland is located here below the larynx, or you may say inferior to the larynx. This is the thyroid gland. It is inferior to the larynx and interior to the trachea. This is the posterior end of the trachea, and this is the interior end of the trachea. And it consists of 2 lobes. This is one lobe of thyroid gland, and this is another lobe of thyroid gland. So they consist of 2 lateral lobes which are present on either side of the trachea. One lobe is present on the left lateral side of the trachea, and another lobe is present on the right lateral side of the trachea. So it consists of 2 lobes, and both these lobes are, this one is left lobe and this one is the right lobe, and both these lobes are connected by a small stalk which is known as isthmus. So this was its external look or external structure, and internally it consists of many group of cells. This is one group of cell, and let's suppose here is another group of cells. As I told in one of my lectures, that arrangement of cells in such a way that they enclosed a cavity, such type of arrangement of cells is called follicle. So as you can see, these are the cells, and they are arranged in such a way that they enclosed a central cavity. So therefore, they are called follicles. So internally, thyroid gland consists of many follicles, and the cells which formed this follicle, these cells are called follicular cells. And as this follicle is present in thyroid gland, therefore they are called thyroid follicle. And as you know that in the ovary there are also present follicle, but there we call them ovarian follicles because they are present in the ovary. So these are the follicular cells, and this whole structure is called follicle. Adjacent to these follicles, some cells are present. These cells are called parafollicular cell. Para means adjacent. These are the parafollicular cells. Para means adjacent and follicular means follicle. As these cells are adjacent to the follicular cells of the follicle, therefore they are called parafollicular cell. And they may also call, this follicular cell may also called C cells. They are called C cells because of their shape somewhat like a C letter. And in addition to follicular cell or follicle and parafollicular cell, a lot of blood vessels are also present in thyroid gland. The artery which enter into the thyroid gland is called thyroid artery. This is the thyroid artery, and here it gave rise to many capillaries inside thyroid gland, and these capillaries, they surround all these follicles. So each follicle is surrounded by many blood vessels. So these are the internal structure which are present inside thyroid gland, for thyroid follicle, parafollicular cell, and a lot of blood vessels. They are present inside thyroid gland. Now, what are the hormones which are produced and secreted by thyroid follicles and parafollicular cell? The thyroid follicle, they produce and secrete two important hormones. These two hormones are T3 and T4. They produce T3 and T4, while the C cell or parafollicular cell, they produce and secrete calcitonin hormone, which is a protein hormone. In this lecture, I will talk about T3 and T4 hormones, and about calcitonin I will talk in a separate lecture. Now, let me tell you one important thing, that in order to understand, in some situations, कुछ situations में thyroid gland जो है ओवर प्रोड्यूस एंड सिक्रीट करती है थायरॉक्सिन हार्मोन को, और कुछ सिचुएशन में थायराइड ग्लैंड जो है इट सिक्रीट डिक्रीज अमाउंट ऑफ और स्मॉल अमाउंट ऑफ T4 and T3 hormones. The overproduction and secretion of T3 and T4 is called hyperthyroidism, while the undersecretion of T3 and T4 hormone from thyroid gland is called hypothyroidism. Now, there are certain causes of hyperthyroidism, mean to say oversecretion of T3 and T4 hormone, and there are certain causes of hypothyroidism, mean to say the undersecretion of T3 and T4 hormone. In order to understand the causes of hyperthyroidism and hypothyroidism, it is very necessary for someone first at least to know the synthesis of T3 and T4 hormone, that how T3 and T4 hormones are synthesized. कहने का मतलब ये है कि कुछ केसेस में आई नो कि T3 and T4 सिंथेसिस आपके सिलेबस में इंक्लूड नहीं है, बट आई एम एक्सप्लेनिंग देम बिकॉज इससे आगे जो टॉपिक है हाइपरथायराइडिज्म और हाइपोथायराइडिज्म है, तो उसके काजेज जो है हाइपरथायराइडिज्म और हाइपोथायराइडिज्म वो आपको तब समझ आएंगे जब आप जो है व्हेन यू नो द मैकेनिज्म हाउ T3 and T4 आर सिंथेसाइज्ड and what are the material which are needed for the synthesis of T3 and T4 hormone. That is why first I am explaining the synthesis of T3 and T4 hormone, then I will discuss hyperthyroidism and hypothyroidism. So let me first discuss the material or the requirement for T3 and T4 synthesis. So requirement for T3 and T4 synthesis. The first requirement for T3 and T4 is amino acid tyrosine amino acid. is, you know, T3 and T4 are amino acid tyrosine derivatives. So first requirement is tyrosine amino acid, and the second requirement is iodine atoms, and the third both these materials, tyrosine and iodine, we get it from our diet. And the third requirement is stimulus for their synthesis. Of course, the synthesis of hormone need a stimulus. So the stimulus for their synthesis is in the form of TRH hormone from hypothalamus plus TSH hormone from anterior pituitary. As you know, as I talked in my previous lecture, the TRH hormone is produced by hypothalamus, which then act on anterior pituitary, on thyroid cells of anterior pituitary, from where it releases TSH hormone, which then act on thyroid follicular cell of thyroid gland to produce T3 and T4 hormones. So let me explain the mechanism. Now I discussed the requirement for T3 and T4 synthesis. Now I will discuss its mechanism, that how T3 and T4 are synthesized when all these requirements are fulfilled. So I will draw one large follicle. This is one large follicle. And these are its cells, follicular cells. This one follicular cell, and this another follicular cell, and this is the another follicular cell, and these are their nuclei. This one large follicular cell, this one. Here I will show the mechanism of T3 and T4 hormone in this follicular cell, the synthesis of T3 and T4 hormones. And as you know that the cell membrane of follicular cell possesses receptor for TSH. So here is hypothalamus, and this is the posterior pituitary, and this is the anterior pituitary, and this is the blood vessel present adjacent to the follicle. And of course in the blood, here are, remember, in the blood the iodine is present in iodide form, mean to say in charged form. So let's suppose these are the iodides present in the blood, and of course the blood also transport amino acid from the intestine. So let's suppose here are some tyrosine amino acid in the blood, and of course some other amino acids are also present in the blood. Let's suppose these are the tyrosine amino acids, and these are the other types of amino acids. Here is iodide transporter. This iodide transporter actively packs these iodide from the bloodstream and actively transport it inside the follicle. And these amino acids, they first enter here into the space, and from this space they then enter inside the cells. Tyrosine, and some other types of amino acids. Now, the material which are required for T3 and T4 synthesis are now inside the cell, iodides as well as tyrosine amino acids. Of course, iodide cannot bind with tyrosine. They must need to oxidize and must need to transform into iodine form, which I will explain later on, that how they transform into iodine. But let me now talk about the role of TSH hormone. So this hypothalamus, from hypothalamus TRH is released. TRH act on thyroid cell, and from thyroid cell they release TSH hormone. TSH hormone bind with its receptor and stimulate that receptor. And this is the extracellular domain of the receptor, and this is the intracellular domain of the receptor, and this is the nucleus. And I explained in detail the mechanism of action of protein hormone in one of my lecture. You may watch this video, but I cannot go in detail that what happened when TSH or when any protein hormone bind with its receptor. I can just tell you that when protein hormone bind with its receptor, then its intracellular domain also stimulate. As a result of stimulation of intracellular domain, a cascade of reaction signaling start inside the cytoplasm of the cell. As a result of this cascade of reaction, certain transcription factors are also stimulated, and these transcription factors then enter into the nucleus. And in the nucleus, chromosomes are present. Chromosomes consist of DNA, and DNA consists of a lot of genes. Let's suppose these are the this is the DNA, and DNA consists of genes. These transcription factors, after entrance into the nucleus, they bind with certain genes and regulate their expression. So as a result, certain genes are expressed and messenger RNA is produced. This messenger RNA leave the nucleus and enter into the cytoplasm, where it binds with the endoplasmic reticulum. And in the endoplasmic reticulum, this messenger RNA translate into protein, and in this protein synthesis, these amino acids which are now inside the follicle, they also take part. So these amino acids include tyrosine and some other types of amino acid. These amino acids are used by the cell in the protein synthesis. So this is, let's suppose, one tyrosine, another tyrosine, and this is another type of amino acid, another type of amino acid. Again, here is tyrosine and tyrosine. This protein, this large protein, which is synthesized from this messenger RNA, this is called thyroglobulin. Thyroglobulin, TGB. After its synthesis in the endoplasmic reticulum, it enters into the Golgi bodies. So this is the, let's suppose, the Golgi bodies. It enters into the Golgi bodies, and you know, in the Golgi bodies, materials are packed. So in the Golgi bodies, it is packed in vesicle. So these are the tyrosine amino acid, another type of amino acid, another type of amino acid, tyrosine and tyrosine. And here it is packed in vesicle. The vesicle, then tyrosine, other type of amino acid, then tyrosine amino acid, and tyrosine. The vesicle then detach from the Golgi bodies, and then the vesicular membrane fuses with the membrane of the follicular cell. Remember, those cells which enclose a cavity, their membranes are called the membrane of the cells which encloses the cavity. They have two types of membrane. One membrane which faces the cavity, or which faces the lumen of the cavity or of the structure. This membrane is called apical membrane. So this is the lumen of the follicle. So this membrane, it faces the lumen of this follicle. This is called apical membrane, or it may also called luminal membrane. And the membrane which away from the lumen of the follicle, this membrane is called basolateral membrane. So the Golgi, the vesicle inside which now the thyroglobulin is present, this membrane fuses with the apical membrane of follicular cell, and as a result, exocytosis occur. Due to the exocytosis, now the thyroglobulin enter into the lumen of the follicle. So now thyroglobulin is inside the follicle, lumen of the follicle. Now here are iodides. Iodides are present. Remember, as iodides are charged, therefore they cannot cross the cell membrane. They cannot enter into the follicle, lumen of the follicle. So here are enzymes attached with the apical membrane. These enzymes are called peroxidase enzymes. These enzymes, they oxidized these iodides into iodine. Now the iodine can cross the membrane. Here is now iodine. A lot of iodines are also present in the lumen of the follicle. Now, the same enzyme peroxidase also bind iodine with tyrosine amino acid. Remember, the iodine can also bind without the involvement of peroxidase enzyme with tyrosine amino acid, but very slowly. This peroxidase enzyme, it increases the binding of, it increases the reaction, it increases the binding of iodine atoms with the tyrosine amino acid. So these iodine atoms bind with tyrosine amino acid. With some tyrosine amino acid, one iodine atom bind, and with some, two iodine atoms are bind. And same is the case over here. Let's suppose with this tyrosine, one iodine atom attached, and with another one, two iodine atoms attached. And here, let's suppose with this one, two iodine atoms are attached, and with this one also two iodine atoms are attached. This binding of iodine atoms with tyrosine, this process called organification or iodination. So now iodine atoms are attached with thyroglobulin. This is now called iodinated thyroglobulin. So in the same way, many other thyroglobulins are iodinated collectively, all these iodinated thyroglobulin which are present inside the lumen of the follicle, they are called colloid. So this is the colloid. What is colloid? The iodinated thyroglobulin protein present inside thyroid follicle, it is called colloid. Remember, as you know, I talked in my previous lecture, the T3 hormone, it consists of 2 tyrosine amino acid and 3 iodine atoms, while T4 consists of 2 tyrosine amino acid and 4 iodine atoms. So here you may say that this is the T3 and this is the T4 hormone. So these are the T3 and T4 hormones which are present in thyroglobulin form. And this is very important point to remember that T3 and T4 can only stored in thyroid gland in thyroglobulin form. When they are present inside thyroglobulin, they can store here in thyroid gland for 2-3 months. But once they detach from thyroglobulin, then they are lipid soluble, that they cannot then stored. Then they leave the cell and enter into the bloodstream. Now, how T3 and T4 cleave from thyroglobulin and how they enter into the thyroid follicle, I will explain that mechanism. Here, they enter the thyroglobulin, or you may say the colloid, the iodinated thyroglobulin enter into the cell with the process known as pinocytosis. So, as a result of pinocytosis, a pseudopodia is produced. This, a part of this colloid or part of this thyroglobulin enter, let's suppose this one iodinated thyroglobulin, it enter here into this pseudopod. And here are tyrosine amino acid, another amino acid, another type other than tyrosine amino acid, and here is tyrosine and here is tyrosine. And with this tyrosine, 2 iodine atoms are attached, and in this one also 2 iodine atoms are attached, and in this one, let's suppose 1, and in this one 2 iodine atoms are attached. This penocytic vesicle then detach from the apical membrane of the cell and enter into the cell. And here are lysosomes present in the cell, and lysosome contains different types of enzyme. The lysosomal membrane, lysosome come and it fuses with the penocytic vesicle and it discharges its enzyme. Some of these enzymes are proteolytic enzymes. These enzymes digest this iodinated thyroglobulin. Where they digest, they break, they cleave these amino acid, tyrosine amino acid with which iodine atoms are attached. They cleave it here at this point as well as at this point. So in this way, T4 hormone is now released into the cytoplasm from the vesicle, and same is the case over here. This is the T3 hormone. So both now T3 and T4 are now inside the cell. And as I told that once T3 and T4 cleaved from thyroglobulin, then they cannot store by the cell. They then leave the cell membrane and enter into this is the T3 and this is the T4 and this is the T3. they enter into the bloodstream. T4 is also called, of course, thyroxine or tetraiodothyronine, and T3 is called triiodothyronine. Now, if their concentration increase in the blood, then who decrease their concentration? Thyroxine hormone is responsible to regulate its concentration in the blood. How thyroxine regulate its concentration in the blood? If thyroxine hormone, this 34, if its concentration become high in the blood, then this T4 hormone or thyroxine, it has negative feedback effect on its own producing cell. It act on the cell and inhibit the synthesis of thyroglobulin. So once if thyroglobulin formation stop, then of course T3 and T4 synthesis will also stop. So it also has negative feedback effect on TRH producing cell. So it also inhibit the synthesis of TRH. So if there is no TRH, there will be no TSH. If there is no TSH, of course these receptor will not stimulate and thyroglobulin formation will stop. And again T4 and T3 synthesis will decrease in the blood. Now when their concentration decrease in the blood, then these cells become free from the inhibitory effect of T4, and again these cells start to produce thyroglobulin, and also these cells become free from the inhibitory effect of thyroxine, and these cells again start to produce TRH hormone, and TRH then stimulate anterior pituitary to produce TSH, and TSH stimulate its receptor, and again thyroglobulin is produced, and T4 and T3 synthesis again occur, and in this way their concentration again become high. So this is the process with the help of which T3 and T4 concentration maintain in the blood. Now another very important point I'm discussing, that TSH hormone not only stimulate the synthesis of T3 and T4 hormone, TSH hormone also stimulate mitosis or proliferation of follicular cell. If there is a lot of TSH hormone, अगर TSH hormone की secretion बहुत ज़्यादा है, so when a lot of TSH hormone bind with its receptor, so this excessive stimulation of TSH receptor by TSH hormone, it stimulates the cell to divide. As a result, these cells divide, and of course when the cell divide, then the thyroid gland enlarge in size. Sometimes it abnormally enlarge in size. This abnormal enlargement of thyroid gland is called goiter. The important cause of goiter, which I will discuss in a separate lecture when I will discuss hyperthyroidism of thyroid gland or hypothyroidism of thyroid gland, particularly hypothyroidism, then I will discuss the goiter in detail. However, the important cause of goiter is autoimmune reaction. Sometimes our immune response start to produce antibodies which can also bind with TSH receptor. When these antibodies bind with its receptor, TSH receptors, they have more binding affinity with TSH receptor. Mean to say, they bind for a long time with these receptor, and they continuously stimulate these receptors. As a result, these cells proliferate or divide, and as a result, the size of thyroid gland enlarge, which is called goiter. I will talk in detail about the goiter in a separate lecture. Now tell me one thing. If there is, let's suppose, any of that step for any of this requirement, for example, if there is no TSH, of course there will be no T3 and T4 synthesis. Even if there is, if someone lack peroxidase, if someone lack that gene or mutation occurred in that gene which produce peroxidase enzyme, of course T3 and T4 synthesis will not occur. If there is no TRH synthesis, of course there will be deficiency of T3 and T4 hormone, about which I will talk later on in a separate lecture in detail. So in the next lecture I will discuss the function of T3 and T4, and then I will discuss hyperthyroidism and hypothyroidism, their causes and their effects. Class finish.